Okay, so this is my review of Pete Williams's book, Card Sharks: How Upper Deck Turned a Child's Hobby into a High-Stakes $1 million Business. And it was really good. I'll put that out there right away. It was really good. Really enjoyed reading it a lot. Uh, it's really cheap on Amazon. Some libraries probably have a copy. If you're a college kid, your college library might have one, or you got interlibrary loan. Like I said, just buying a copy is pretty cheap. If you're a library person, libraries, however you want to do it. Yeah, I kind of went in thinking it was going to be kind of heavy on baseball, but sort of about all the sports that they make cards for. It ended up being very, very heavy on baseball. But that didn't necessarily take anything away from it for me. It was still really exciting, really enjoyable. I think it was still applicable enough to what they do with their football cards to be fascinating and illuminating, and definitely changed the way I look at things. Because, I talked about this last time, how I'd always noticed that of all the cards, of all the collections that came out in 1991 for football, Upper Decks looks by far the least dated, by far the most modern, by far the most technologically advanced. And the book was interesting insofar as it kind of explained the context behind that, why that was the case, what Upper Deck wanted to do differently, and how they did it, and all that good stuff. Now, Pete Williams does a really, really good job of giving a good 3 or 4 chapters for the background, because Upper Deck, they only came around in like '88, and the book was written in like '94, published in '95. So it's really only about those very, very early years of Upper Deck. But what a lot of the book is kind of going before that. Those first 3 or 4 chapters really about the historical context between 1890 and 1980, to really provide the historical context to give you an understanding of what made Upper Deck so revolutionary. What was the industry like when they entered, and what were they sort of appealing to and addressing with their cards? And kind of the big 3 things that made Upper Deck possible were kind of rookie mania, which began in the kind of early '80s. People realizing that, shoot, rookie cards from like several decades ago are selling for a lot of money now. So we should try to get rookies that are coming out now and save those. And suddenly you care about the condition of the card. Suddenly, a rookie of a solid player is more valuable than a non-rookie card of a great player, and all the kind of things that come with that we know and love. And the second bit of context that's really relevant is the just general expansion of the market. Fleer having taken Topps and the Players Association to court, alleging that they were engaged in anti-competitive behavior, that essentially kind of the interplay between Topps and the Players Association was anti-competitive, that it violated antitrust law, and the court deciding in favor of Fleer, which now suddenly you've got more than one company having a license to make cards, which was huge. And of course, the third thing, the biggest one, is counterfeiting. Once, cards become valuable, or you get to a point where cards could be valuable, at the same time as they were valuable, they weren't that hard to make. They weren't that hard to counterfeit. In fact, some of the earliest people who got busted for counterfeiting cards had sort of started as a joke they played on some of their friends, but it's like, oh wow, you could actually pass these off. But yeah, that was really the problem that no one had a great solution for. No one was really seemed to be trying to solve. So enter Upper Deck. And this is actually my favorite part of the book, is sort of the middle third, that is all about Upper Deck getting started, sort of the characteristic struggles of a startup company that really, really believes in itself, that really believes they have a great revolutionary idea, and how it's just really captivating to read about that company getting going, and how even for a company that has a great solution to a problem that no one else has a problem to, it's still really, really tough. Still a lot of things have to go right. Still a lot of obstacles in the way to actually getting in there and being a success. And especially with baseball cards, just because the industry is so unique that, even people with great, business acumens could make stupid mistakes if they didn't really know a lot about baseball card collecting. So yeah, that was captivating to read about that aspect of it. I think the most memorable, my favorite passage of the whole book is when they're actually on the phone with like the Players Association person. They're actually trying to make the case for getting a license right when they had just awarded a couple new licenses and really, really weren't planning on giving any other company a license for at least several years. And so definitely having that impulse to just sort of hang up the phone, the Upper Deck guys, they really had to make the case that, hey, the industry might not be there in several years if, you don't allow us to do our thing. Because, look, counterfeiting cards is ruining the industry and no one else is trying to solve it. And it might have been hyperbolic, but it kind of worked. And yeah, it worked. But that's where sort of, to get back to the title of this video, that's sort of where Paul Sumner comes in, because the book, a lot of it is about Mac, or Richard McWilliams, sort of the face of the company. But it seems like part of the implicit thesis, or part of what Williams is trying to do, is kind of draw attention to some of the figures that really made the company possible, that were really responsible for the ideas that don't get as much credit as McWilliam, who really started as kind of, in charge of finance in terms of finding investors, and eventually became the CEO. But Paul Sumner is really the key name. Paul Sumner had the background in, print technology and graphic tech. Worked for a company called Orbis. And so he knew all about that stuff, and the impetus for Upper Deck really did begin just in, Bill Hemrick's card shop, just a conversation with Paul Sumner, this print deck guy who walked in, who noticed, one of the counterfeit cards Hemrick had up on the wall. Hemrick was his background was really as in being just a huge baseball card guy, a huge collector who'd actually gotten scammed a couple times with counterfeit cards. And the conversation that Sumner started with him was about how easy it would be to make cards that couldn't be counterfeit, or at least be way, way harder to counterfeit, partly by using a hologram on the back of the card. And so you really you go from there through all the trials they went through after that to make it real. But it couldn't have happened without that conversation, which is awesome. I think Williams does a really good job of introducing you to these figures and getting you to know the people, the interesting personalities that were behind this whole thing. And that made it just a really cool story from just a human interest perspective, is getting to know people like Sumner and Hemrick, who, interestingly enough, after he got fired from Upper Deck, went to Tennessee and started printing country music star cards. Interestingly enough. The third part of the book, kind of the last third, might have been my least favorite. And I think you can see why it's necessary. They really wanted to show you kind of the complexity of Richard McWilliam and how he ran the company, including some of the things about him that were a little bit less than flattering, some of the controversies that they became embroiled in with, for example, with reprinting. how quick he was to throw people under the bus, to fire people. Williams definitely talked with a lot of disgruntled employees who had been pretty instrumental in getting the thing started. So, yeah, I mean, that is their perspective, but it's, yeah, McWilliam really was an interesting guy, but you can definitely see why there were parts of this book that he wasn't crazy about. And there were moments when he really was a bit standoffish with Pete Williams. And that last third of the book, it's interesting its own way. I say it's probably my least favorite because it gets very deep and extensive into sort of the personal drama between McWilliam and some of these other people, and after a while it does get a little bit tedious at certain moments, but it doesn't ruin the book by any stretch. I think it's my least favorite part, but that's given the fact that the first 2/3 are so fantastic. Well, one takeaway is that the title's a little bit misleading. How Upper Deck turned a child's hobby into a high-stakes billion-dollar business. Just because so many of a lot of what went into that transition from point A to point B happened before Upper Deck. Upper Deck, you get the sense they really rode the wave. They helped solidify some of these changes, but a lot of them kind of happened before they really came around. It'd be really interesting to see someone. I'm kind of surprised they haven't re-released this book with like a new forward or something, because a lot's happened in the 23 years since it's come out. Upper Deck, a lot of my favorite Upper Deck collections came out a lot later than when this was published. They stopped doing football in, I think 2009, 2010. At least those are the latest Upper Deck cards I have. They stopped doing baseball at some point, because I know Topps, I think, has the exclusive license for baseball now. They still do hockey. I think Upper Deck has the exclusive license for hockey now, which is very, very different than how things were when this all started. But it'd be cool. It'd be cool to see someone write a good forward for that book and release a new edition, because it's really interesting and relevant now, especially now that things have kind of come full circle, at least with football, and I guess with every sport, because you had a lot of years where like only one company would really have a license with the league, and then in the case of football, you went from having 2 companies then with licenses to 8 in the span of about 2 years, and the 90s are sort of the Wild West. I have a video where I flip through a whole bunch of 100 of the collections that came out in the 90s, and then they started kind of going out, they started buying each other up, it kind of narrowed a little bit, and now we've kind of come full circle. Got to the point where only Topps and Panini had licenses with the NFL, and then in 2015 they made it exclusive to Panini, so things have really come full circle. I'll probably make another video about that, about the Panini and football, a little later, but a lot of things the book talks about, they're still really relevant now. It's just a fascinating read.